Well, guys, welcome to the channel, right? Kind of a crappy video, but it's a crappy evening, or early morning, I guess, depending on how you look at it. It is going on 3 a.m. I just finished up a nice place. You can't really see it over there. Truck's there in the background. It is a place called La Tropicana here in Urbandale, Iowa. And it's kind of a Mexican restaurant slash grocery store. So, I've been going through a lot of videos and a lot of issues, and you've been any kind of long-term subscriber to the channel, you know I have a lot of issues. There's no doubt about it. But I got thinking, I've been in this hobby for going on better part of 50 years. And about 4 weeks or so, September 20th will be my 59th birthday. So I'll be 59 next month. And I was about 9 years old, if I remember my memory is, we're talking a long damn time ago, the exact year that I became interested in role-playing games. So I thought, what makes us who we are in relation to the hobby that we all share and enjoy? And so I started writing this down. Somebody else was doing a video on Facebook on a completely unrelated track, and it was really early in the morning. I was half asleep, and I started posting comments, and the comments kind of led me into this rabbit hole of my own making. And I tend to apologize sometimes to people for doing this. That this is one of them fancy, kind of rain hat. Trust me, it's well worth the investment considering what I do out here. So, here's your chance to tune away. Most of you have already done it anyway. Thank you for clicking on the video and going on about your business. If you just all would do the same thing in the comments, even if you don't say that, you just, flip me off, I guess. Comments are comments, right? It helps the algorithm for YouTube, they say. Like I should care. Well, I kind of care. Anyhow, in my youth, I played roles, like specialized pieces on a chessboard. We were young. We had no idea what the hell we were doing. We learned by reading what Gygax and others put in the game manuals. And as we got older and we bought more games and more supplements and started expanding our interest, the same thing still applied. Most of my friends and I, in our early teens, thought of our characters as specific roles. When we talk about role playing, in those days we thought, well, we were taking on the role. So if I use chess as an example, the rook or the castle or the bishop. In Dungeons and Dragons, the fighter, the cleric, the magic user, the thief, because that's what they were called back then. We didn't consider things like in character as character, or full immersion, or whatever the current slang and terminology that gets tossed around today applies. We were having fun. Why did we get into it though? Now part of this video, you can thank somebody, a nice fellow who lives over in South Korea by the name of Casey Lee. He posts many very deep, thought-provoking questions on yet a different Facebook group that I belong to, and some of that applies here too. My apologies, Casey. I'm sure I'm going to butcher everything that you eloquently stated, because I'm a crude bastard and y'all ain't. Right? You don't like my language, move away. Find a different damn channel, because I'm who I am, and I can't change certain things in my aspect. I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I was born with several splinters from somebody else's wooden spoon, kind of stuff. Why did I play? Why did my friends and I play? Well, a big part of it was escapism. We lived in a little town in the middle of nowhere, Iowa. As far as we concerned, it was the whole world. My family never had money to go on vacations and take trips. I have never been in an airplane in my life. I haven't even been close to one, short of watching them, beyond the fence of the local airport or fly overhead. That's for rich people. And I understand that middle-class families have more advantages sometimes than they think. But my family never did. So one portion was escapism, to get away from where we were. And we were kids, early teenagers, with all the angst and issues that went along with that. And then you double down when you go, as you graduate and go higher into things like high school, and you now have many small towns converging on one big place that's now you're in a whole nother swimming pool full of yahoos, right? So we played to have fun, to escape. And escapism unto itself is a completely different video. Why do we escape? Well, I got a lot of dark stuff in my past, and I'm not throwing that out there because I've tried to come to terms with some of it. Some of it I've never quite understood or been able to. I just ignore it, right? Because that's what we're supposed to do. Those of us who can't afford therapy and special stations with shrinks and things like that. Once again, that's for wealthy people. A lot of us poor people just talk to other people or find ourselves at 3 o'clock in the morning sitting in a chair in front of somebody's business and there are security cameras, and they'll probably go, who the hell is that guy? What the hell is he doing? Trying to make sense of our world and our life. We played to have fun, played to pass time. Now, this was before video games were really a thing. There were some very crude video games. The first video game I ever played was actually, I don't know what it's called off the top of my head. My uncle bought this thing. It was like based on the original Pong, and they had these cellophane screens that you would static clean to the front of your TV. One of them was like a haunted house, and you had this little pistol, and you would shoot the ghost whenever the ghost popped up in the windows. And then my same uncle bought a TSR. I forget what the original model was, and then he got an 80, and everything was hand-coded. My cousin and I, he gave my cousin a code book about the size of a small phone book for a game called Star Trek, and it was very, very crude. It took us all winter to code it, and anything that was off would make it not work. So we had to go through line for line, and I was hell-bent to get this thing running. Of course, it was on my uncle's computer at a different house where I didn't get to play it very often. Right. And my other friends their families had a little better money. Both parents worked, so-and-so had better income coming in. So they went and got the first Ataris and Nintendos and stuff like that. And I played them when I was at their house, but my games were in pen and paper. And it was a choice, right? So why did we play? Why did we want to role play? Like I said, to have fun, to escape. Something deeper. But at the time, what did I know? I was just a young man, a kid, growing up into a teenage young man. So by the time I get into my late teens, my curiosity and imagination had trained my mind to put myself in another person's shoes, i.e. my character, and as the DM. This was something that was a growth period, because I remember getting the first, when we had the original Greyhawk campaign, and my friend Richie and I, we played and played and played, and then at some point, I don't know, I just started kind of ad-libbing things where I had a paladin character who started to take over the known world, and it was more of a war game at that point. But I was still testing the field as to what it would be like to run the game. And at those days, we all took turns running stuff, and we determined that a couple of our friends didn't want to do all the hard work. Which is ironic, considering I ended up doing most of the dungeon mastering in our late teens, and I did a lot of hard work on setting up my campaigns and my worlds and world building and stuff, learning from nothing, from scratch, from my vivid love of science fiction and fantasy novels. I mean, I read everything I get my hands on. I was at the local library a lot back, I could buy when I could and when I could afford it, but the only way I ever got to buy anything was through my mowing money, and then later when I got a job. Well, we move into the, what becomes more depth? Because when you hit the late teens, Now you're dealing with things like getting ready to graduate high school, deciding if you're going to go into military service, if you're going to go to college and university. Not everybody gets to have those options. College was not an option for me. My parents didn't have the money to pay for it, and I didn't have good enough grades to get grants and things like that, or I didn't have the knowledge how, and I had nobody willing to help me. Nobody looked at me and said, "Oh, you should go to university." Nobody in my family went to university. A lot of them went into the military. So I went into the recruiter's office and told I was too fat. 1984, and I was told, "Dude, you're 30 pounds too fat. Come back. Go lose 30 pounds. Come back." Now I could have done that. And I probably could have just dropped 10 pounds and come back, and they would have saw that I was willing to make the effort and maybe made an exception. Or I could have, I gave up on the idea, well, I'm going to be in the Navy and went to the Army or something, and whatever reasons. So I played more, and I worked harder to understand how to bring the worlds alive and how to make them interesting as much as possible. I tried to be the greatest railroad conductor I could be. I mean, I didn't understand that's what it was at the time, and neither did my friends. This was something that hadn't become a thing yet, at least not in our circles. It wasn't until the late 80s that we got access to internet and stuff, and I personally didn't get anything until like 91 was when I first got my hooked up to the internet. Don't quote me on that, but American Online was by the hour. It was expensive. And prior to that, I had CompuServe, and it was worse. It was even more damn expensive. So, like I said, by my late teens, tried to put myself in another person's shoes, mostly my character's shoes. I wanted to understand why my character would want to do something like this. What motivated my now rogue to steal things or to learn how to pick locks, and how well was he able to do it, or et cetera, right? I mean, everybody goes through this journey. Everybody goes through this journey, or you don't. There is a YouTube channel, and if I remember, and I have a tendency to not remember, and if nobody flags that and says, "Hey dude, did you remember to post this thing?" I may never remember, unless I go back and watch the video and then remember and then remind myself to do the thing, then I forget to do the thing. Anyway, there's this fellow with a YouTube channel, and he has never played role-playing games in his life. And when you look at him, you look at this kind of guy, and he's the sort of guy that right off the bat you assume, wrongly so, that he wouldn't be into this sort of stuff. Video games, yes. Tabletop war games, no. But what he's trying to do is he has two young children, and one of them, or I don't want to say is autistic because I don't know that, but they have learning curves and very short attention spans, and he's trying to find everything he can to engage his children to expand their mindset and to help them grow. And in doing so, learning how to role play and how to run games and so on and so forth. It's an interesting channel, and I understand some of what he's trying to do. All right. So another 10 years later, so I get into my mid to late 20s. Now the internet's a thing. Social media is starting to crank up. Once again, like I said, AOL was the dominant social media site you had available at the time, in my circle anyway. And we had lots of chat rooms, and that's where I learned to play things like, play by post via chat rooms and by text and email, or by email, because we didn't have cell phones quite yet. Cell phones were expensive, and they were heavy and bulky, and they were starting to become smaller and smaller, but they were still freaking expensive. That was not something I would not get my own cell phone until like 2001, 2002. That's the truth. It was just a money thing, Of course, all the extra money I had went into paying for video game or role-playing game material and stuff like that. So another 10, and by my mid-20s, my desire to understand the motives of my characters, or the ecology of the settings that I was creating, the worlds that I was building, become more upfront, more important to me. Of course, as a young man, I'm matured. I've become an adult. I'm starting to look at the wider world around me, And in some ways, I've become very bitter. I became very bitter because I just felt like I got left behind somehow. My friends went off to school or went off to college and went off to the military, and then they never came back. Or they did, but they went on about their own lives, and we were no longer friends. And that was harsh. It was hard. It had led me to, I want to say led me, it just made it easier for me to become even more selfish and self-centered and to drift into, I don't know. It took me a long time to get out of that, but a lot of my life revolved around the role-playing games and material. As a player, I really was wanting to get more into my character's shoes. I tried more to think of why my character, not why, but what would my character do in this given situation. And that's when I started to realize that characters can take on personalities of their own. And I really didn't appreciate that for another 20 years, and the implications of that. But I started to understand why some parties, some tables, some groups last far longer than others, and why some people are more devout players than others. It's never an easy thing, right? So we get into, by my mid 40s, right? I was diving deeper into the various systems and how they worked, beginning to work, and to begin working on making games of my own, right? I was wondering, the hows and the whys of the mechanics. Now, we're talking in the 40s, so this would have been in the mid-teen, 2010 to 2020, whatever you want to call it, 2018, something like that. So I was more interested in understanding the nuances between a lot of the crunch that people don't like. And I never considered it crunch. I considered it options, opportunities, things to give us kernels of thought. But more importantly, how does that interact with the players and making the game funner or more engaging or more interesting? And I ain't going to say that I was successful at it. I don't know that I was or I wasn't. I also started trying my hand at writing a novel or two. I was once again in a very dark place and isolated, mostly because of my own making. And an associate of mine told me, he says, you're driving yourself, you're going to go crazy. You need to find something to put the creativity to use, And I was having issues at that point sticking with a regular group of players. The group that in the 90s that I had been involved with for a long time had broken up, and after my young friends and after high school and all my school buddies went their ways, I had found myself needing to find another group of players. So it took me a while to do that. That's how I got involved in the local chapter of the RPGA and going to Gen Con or going to the DemiCon, which are local conventions and stuff here in Iowa at the time. And I met new people, but I never really established that close bond like I had back in high school. And I gave up. I just assumed, and so far it's been correct. It just isn't, not all of us get that option. It just isn't what it is. But I really wanted to understand why people want to play the games, what attracts them. Something about this hobby fills an itch or a niche for many people. And how do we engage them? It's just like the mechanics of game systems. There are so many different varieties of systems, and yet they all share a lot of common ground, a lot of commonality. And it's funny and ironic sometimes when you have discussions with people who just become utterly belligerent about the idea that, this game system is nothing like that game system. True, mechanically speaking, maybe philosophically speaking, genre speaking, but yet there's a lot of common ground. It's like today when so many people are angry and frustrated And because they're angry and frustrated and been angry and frustrated for a long time, they're easily manipulated. And the sad part is they don't see that they're being manipulated. And by the time they wake up to it, it's often too late, right? It's a very ugly country today in a lot of ways. And yet, we still have a lot of common ground. I have skin. I breathe for the moment. I have red blood pushing through those veins in my body that are packed full of fat and who knows what else. Same as you. I don't give a care, and I don't care what your personal preferences are, what your home life is, unless it directly affects me somehow. I don't care about your skin color or your sexual preferences or any of that stuff. What does that have anything to do with the game table and sitting there playing the hobby, right? So I started developing my own game systems. I made several crude ones at the beginning, and then I really doubled down and then doubled down again on this one I've been, I don't know, banging away at for so long, and I was hell-bent on getting it created, and it's been a good part of 3 years getting the core of the rule set figured out, and I still hate every bit of it. I mean, I love the game, I love the system, I do, but I think it's garbage. I think it's junk in many ways, but yet everybody who's ever played it liked it. At least they told me they did, Truth is what it is. But I also know that my own failings or lack of skill sets in certain areas is a disservice. And a good editor, a good coach, sometimes we got to do things the hard way, right? So when I hear other people say, I'm working on the game, I encourage them. When they actually get it published, I applaud them. I don't think you understand just how rare that is, on both accounts. A lot of people talk about doing something, very few people actually set out to do it. I got to that 90% mark, 80% mark, and I'm not finished. I'm still slowly poking away. I have to get a digital version of this thing with some artwork in it so I can put it on damn, RPG drive-through so people can get it for nothing or near nothing. I kid myself. Sometimes I say I'll put it out there for free, and sometimes I say, oh no, I'm going to charge something for it because it seems like it ought to be, it's just kind of what we're expected to do. So it brings me into the current age, like I said, I'm approaching 50, 60, so I'm in my late 50s. I have not had a regular gaming group since 2009? No. 2000, let's just say 2013, about 2013. Once again, life took a real rough turn. I found myself in a different place, surrounded by people I didn't know, dealing with new situations, estranged from my spouse and my family for a while because of stupidity and poor decisions on my part. Yet, my skills still served me because I was able to run games and create some of them on the spot or with very little effort. They weren't very good, but they were better than nothing. And when others would, like I said, I had an associate who bought the entire 4th edition core books. There's like 11 of them he bought, 12 of them. He bought them almost all in one go. And then he tried for like 4 months to set it up. He worked and worked and worked, and then he says, you know what, I don't want to do this. So he says, here, you use these and you run a game. And I said, fine, so when would you like to start a session? And he said, I don't know, how long, how many months is it going to take? And I said, why don't we start for next Saturday? And he was amazed and annoyed that I actually came up with something in less than a week. And we played that fourth edition D&D for a better part of 2 years until he moved away, and I gave him his books back, of course. And and so much for that. I chose never to buy 4th edition. It was not my gig. I didn't really like it. It still worked. It was functional. Don't get me wrong. Right? So in this day and age, I try to do play-by-post when I can get somebody to do it. It's hit or miss. I entertain the idea of just making an opportunity, finding a slot during the week and insisting on this is my day, I'm going to go game stuff. I'm not trying to step on my wife or my employers or anything like that. It's hard to make that commitment when you feel like there's not a lot of point to it, right? I still keep calling myself, eventually I'll get another gaming group, even if that's me in a nursing home somewhere waiting for my, and with a bunch of captive people that are bored out of their skull that may or may not want to play. I mean, you never know. You just never know what history or what the future brings. So, what motivated me to play games in the first place still applies. In a way, role-playing games, and I use it, and I think that there's a running thread these days where a lot of people believe that the terminology role-play is misplaced, and I believe it may be. It may be just one of those things that somebody thought back in the day, like me, we're going to assume a position, a role. So, there's a fighter, a cleric, a thief, and a magic user. Who will you be? At those days, it was a given that we would have those four minimum, and that each one would be played by somebody else or would be doubled up by somebody. The idea that we would have a game, session or a campaign was all magic users didn't come about until my 20s and 30s when we were experimenting with doing things different because we were trying to broaden our horizons and because we were bored of the basics. That's how we become more advanced, right? The way we go and the way we do things is what it is. Where we go from here, who knows? That's like 2000 and late 2016, early 2017. I started this channel on YouTube. Over 1,000 channels. I'm just one subscriber short of 1,070. It's funny how it goes in bursts. I've had a lot of growth in that. Now it's stagnating again, and in part because I spent last year and a half cramming nothing but BattleTech videos, and that really helped my growth. Isn't that ironic? Ironic. The BattleTech grows my channel much better than any other damn game system. Even though, and a lot of what I think in my opinions on this, that, and the other thing apply to just any game system, including BattleTech, but any game system. It's hard to say specific this and specific that, right? It's been a long time coming from that back in those days. And with everything we have today, so many game options, so many varieties. It's like I tell the young man with his young boys, and they're like 4 and 5 years old. I said, there is a game system for everybody. You couldn't say that 40 years ago, but you can now. There is a game system for everybody. If you have an interest in it, there is a system out there that